This is What's Next. I'm host Thomas O'Neill White, and all this week we are focusing on the 2 years since the racist attack on May 14th on Buffalo's east side that claimed the lives of 10 and wounded 3 more. Through the lenses of progress, challenges, resilience, reform, and Black joy, we can get a better sense of Buffalo and Buffalo's east side community in the 2 years since that fateful day. Joining me today is Jillian Hanesworth, Emmy nominee and Buffalo's very first Poet Laureate. Jillian, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me. I feel like I'm a part of the team now. So.
You really are. You really are. It's great having you back on. And you know, we're focusing on the topic of resilience. Now, how would you define resilience?
I would define resilience as the ability to adjust to the new normal, the ability to create in spaces that are not designed for us to create, the ability to survive a system that is not designed for us to survive. I think Black people really embody resilience. You know, like if you are an African American, you are the direct descendant of a slave who refused to die in a world that didn't see them as a person. So I think we can really go down a really deep path when we talk about resilience, especially as it pertains to Black people. But in simple terms, it's just the ability to keep going.
Mm-hmm. And it's how would you apply the word resilience to Buffalo's Black community on the east side? Same way?
Yes, in part. I would still define it the same way.
Yeah.
But I would definitely... I'm always careful not to praise resilience too much, because I think sometimes we subconsciously or unconsciously normalize the things that we are surviving for the sake of our ability to survive it. For example, after May 14th, I came on this program and a lot of other programs and really pushed back on the Buffalo Strong theme that we were seeing happen literally May 15th. People started saying, we're Buffalo Strong, we're Buffalo Strong. And I'm like, but if we're being honest about all of this, what just happened is a sign of a weakness. We are exposed in this area because you can close one grocery store and stop thousands of people from being able to access food. It's a weakness because you can Google, where do all the people live in Buffalo, and easily see that 14208 has the most densely populated Black population outside of New York City. Like these are weak spots. So instead of praising our strength, we need to really focus our energy towards the issues, the things that are causing us to have to be resilient because they're not normal.
Right. And you can't just put that on a shirt.
Right.
You can't create that slogan.
Right. Like we can't strong arm our way out of systems. We have to change the systems. We have to break the system. So instead of just being like, we are amazing because we're resilient, I like to say yes and. Like, we're amazing because we're resilient, but we're also amazing because we exist. And like our existence is enough to make us strong and make us worthy and make us beautiful. It doesn't have to live in our resilience.
Well put. You are the first Poet Laureate in the history of this fair city, but that comes with a lot of responsibility. What was it like for you in that role for that year and a half, 2 years, essentially, following the shooting?
So when I first became the Poet Laureate in 2021, I think a lot of people in the community were like, okay, this is cool, we like this. But on May 14th, I feel like the role kind of got defined in a different way.
Right. It certainly shifted.
Yeah.
How so?
So prior, it was like, I was talking about art and access, and, people were calling me for these beautiful community ceremonies and, Juneteenth on Jefferson. And I was just like outside, just really celebrating who we are, who our community is. And then May 14th happened, and that had to shift. You know, like I had to celebrate who we are, but it was also about speaking truth to power. And it became about talking about one of the most painful things that has happened in the history of our city and making it digestible so that we can talk about it. I found myself being a trusted voice. And, you know, even to this day, I'm like, I don't think people understand that half the time I didn't know if I was saying the right thing or not. But I went from people wanting to hear the poetry to people really wanting to hear what I had to say from my heart, even if it wasn't poetry. They were just like, say something to us. And that was a big responsibility. I can't tell you how many times I like cried to my parents and my friends, like, this is not fair. Nobody else is being asked to do this. Like, nobody else is being asked to be on a camera on May 15th, to be honest, but in a digestible way, to speak to our resilience while also not normalizing the struggles, to make it rhyme, like all of this stuff. At the same time, I'm like, this is crazy. Like, why am I being asked to do this? And my mom really just reminded me, like, you know, we put ourselves in these positions where we dream of being somebody who can be impactful in our community, in this world. And then something happens where you really are now going to have to be about what you say you want to be about. And you can be about it, or you can get out of the way and let somebody else step in so that they can be about it. So my mom was like, you're going to do it or not? Like, you can't,
and
you got to decide.
That action.
And I it would keep me up at night if I wasn't. So yeah, I just started saying what was in my own heart and what I believed. And thankfully, for a lot of people, that was what they needed to hear. But I still don't know how.
Was there pushback? Some pushback from what you were saying?
Not necessarily from what I was saying. There were a couple things. I remember doing an interview and making a comment about how it's interesting to me that when you walk into a lot of grocery stores, the first thing you see is like fresh produce. You walk into Wegmans, you can like smell flowers. Like when you walk into the grocery store, you can like smell the floral section. You can like smell the fresh produce. When you walk into Tops on Jefferson, you smell fried food. Like the produce looks beat up. You know what I mean? Like the quality of the food is not as good as the quality in other grocery stores. And I remember saying, you know, when Tops reopens, since we know it's going to reopen, we want the same quality of products that you would get at any other store. And I had people who coincidentally weren't from the east side of Buffalo. They were like from Western New York, saying like, you shouldn't have made that comment about fried food. And I'm like, okay, put it in the suggestion box. Like, I don't know what to tell you. And then when I did the memorial wall for Tops, so someone from Tops called me and they were like, you know, we're thinking about what we want to do to memorialize the lives that were stolen inside the store. And we're getting some suggestions that we get a poem from you. Some of our community members, our employees, artists that we've spoken to, they've all said, talk to you. So I'm like, okay. I did not know how I felt about the store reopening. And honestly, I have not gone in the store since. But I did have people coming up to me like, Jill, you're doing this poem, basically thinking that me doing this poem means that I want the grocery store to reopen.
Yeah, tacit endorsement of whatever Tops is going to do.
Yeah. And that wasn't what it was. It was more me doing what the community asked me to do. Like, yes, I know it's in Tops, but the employees of Tops who had already determined that they were going to still work there, that they were going to be back, that they didn't have a choice in some instances, they wanted to see that. So that is what made me say yes. But I also learned through that process that I don't have to over justify all of my actions. You know, people who want to trust my heart will, and people who don't won't. So I have to be comfortable living in that space.
So I guess it would make sense that it was kind of difficult navigating media appearances while also trying to be that community member, that community voice that a lot of people needed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have no media training. Like, I just stood in front of a camera one day and someone started asking me questions. And I was working too at the time. I still had a full-time job with Open Buffalo. And Open Buffalo is right on Jefferson, right by Jefferson and Utica. So we were working, but then also doing food pantries. And, you know, our entire like set of goals and things that we needed to complete just shifted, and we had to really focus on the immediate needs, while also thinking about long-term strategies for like systems change. So yeah, it was definitely a lot. It was a lot. It was exhausting. I look back at pictures from that summer, and in some of the pictures, I legit don't recognize myself. It's like, who is that? I just look so tired and in some ways defeated, you know, standing outside and giving groceries to people and driving to strangers' houses to drop groceries off to them because nobody's checking on them. it's exhausting when you shouldn't have to do that.
You mentioned systems change. What does that mean?
That means that instead of creating a city where we try to fix problems with service like food pantries, or even with temporary solutions like grant projects, we actually create a society where we eliminate the barriers so that people can find the success they need. They can find economic stability. For example, we know that in Buffalo, it's really hard to own land, especially if you are a Black person, especially if you don't come from wealth or generational wealth. If you are just a person who is working a 9-to-5 in 2024 who does not own a home, it's going to be really hard for you to become a homeowner. Now, we see places like the Fruit Belt Community Land Trust who are coming up with systems to establish land trusts so that community members can own homes. We can own the house. We can own the land that the home is on. That's a systems change. If we were to get a law enacted that said that 20%, 30% of the residential properties in the city, within the city lines, that are for sale have to be allocated to residents. You know, we're not going to let people from New York City buy and rent up all these properties while people who live here can't afford to own anything.
Yes. Like,
it's long-term changes that eliminate barriers as opposed to immediate but sometimes temporary solutions, or remedies to the symptoms and not the actual issue itself.
Right, and that just kind of fits in with the fact that that 514 further illuminated issues plaguing Buffalo's East Side for generations. As you mentioned, affordable housing, food apartheid, infrastructure, public transportation, and much more. And obviously, members of the community have been shouting from the mountaintop, or as India Walton would say, shouting into the void for a lot longer. How does it sit with you that we are still having these same conversations 2 years later? And also the fact that something as simple as putting another grocery store, major grocery store on Buffalo's East Side, which would make 2 grocery stores on Buffalo's East Side, has not happened yet.
Right. So it's disappointing. So I'm 31, and in over 30 years, according to Dr. Henry Louis Taylor, there's been no economic growth for Black people on the east side of Buffalo. So in my lifetime, I don't know what it looks like to watch my community actually rise economically together.
That's incredible.
And that's powerful. You know, like in my lifetime, I don't know what it looks like to watch a community grow. I anticipate more conversations around what has changed since May 14th. But like you said, I don't think people are really realizing that May 14th only exacerbated existing issues.
Right.
There are no new systemic issues that we've seen since May 14th. It's only been the same issues that we have been screaming about for as long as I've been alive. So that's disheartening. I hate the fact that we have to be in a situation where we are constantly talking about what we need and we're not seeing those changes happen.
Mm-hmm.
But in part, the onus has to also be on us as a community.
Right.
I heard this saying that I say all the time. There are politicians who get elected to make change, and there are politicians who get elected to stay elected. And we as a community, we need to really determine what type of leadership we need, what our political and strategic agenda is, what our needs are as the Black community in this city, a community that has for so long been underserved, underrepresented, what we need, and making sure that we are putting people into positions of leadership over us who are going to meet our needs, and not necessarily people who just want to be in leadership.
Want to be a politician.
Want to be a politician. So a part of that is on the community. Like, we as a community, we need to decide, what do we want? What does Buffalo look like to us if it's a city that works for us? We need to completely reimagine how it feels and how we go about determining how we are governed.
Mm-hmm.
Because it hasn't worked. Like, flat out, it has not worked. Even when we look at our leadership, right? We live in a community that has had the same mayor for over half of my lifetime.
Wow.
But during my entire lifetime, we have had no economic growth. So what are we doing here? Mm-hmm. Like, what are we requiring the right things? Do we have the ability as a community, the willingness as a community to say, we don't care who you are. If you are not serving us, you have to go because you work for us. Like, so I'm hoping that through my art and through the activism work that I do, I can inspire the community and empower the community to realize that we get to decide what the city looks like. We get to decide how it functions. But that really does start on Election Day.
Right. And it shouldn't take an unimaginable tragedy or tragedies,
right,
to get buy-in from local, state
yeah,
and federal. That shouldn't have to come to that.
Exactly. It shouldn't have to come to that. So we definitely need to, as a community, determine, what does Buffalo look like a year from now? What does Buffalo look like 2 years from now? What do we need? How can Buffalo serve us as the people who are serving it? And then make sure that there is no dissonance between what we say we need and who we actually put into office.
So how do you rally the troops? How do you rally the community? Is that it's obviously got to be like grassroots mm-hmm. type of thing, but there does seem to be like a lot of infighting. I mean, you can just look at what the whole Kensington project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's many moving parts. There's mm-hmm. many dissenting voices. People who are for. Nobody can come together and say, well, if we actually talk and sit down, maybe we can get something that works for everyone. Mm-hmm. But no, it's this side, it's this side, it's the other side, it's another side. Mm-hmm. So how do you get the wider community to come together and try to map out something bigger?
Yeah, I think it's as simple as talking to them and actually being willing to listen. Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of canvassing and I've seen a lot of canvassing. And it's always interesting when you see a canvasser. And if you don't know what I mean by a canvasser, I mean someone who goes door to door. They might knock on your door and ask you to sign a petition. Some canvassers talk at the people that they are trying to get to engage, and some listen to the people they're trying to engage. And I think in a community like ours, like you said, India screaming into the void, right? You have people who historically are used to being ignored. People who are used to saying, here are my needs, and people say, okay, thank you for your input, and then nothing changes. So that's something that we have to consider when it comes to getting the community on the same page. Like, we have to start with building trust, because a lot of people, everyday, day-to-day people who are not involved in politics, who are not a part of any of these organizations, they are used to their needs just not being met. So they have a natural cynicism towards people who say, hey, I'm coming because I think we can do something together. We can actually change things. And they're like, listen, I'm 35 and I've never seen anything change here. We've been hungry. We've been cold. We've been broke. I nobody in my family ever owned a house. So what are you going to do for me? So I think a large part of that is understanding that people are kind of stuck in that state of survival. Like, they have only had to survive this system that we have here. It has never worked for us. So we have to handle people with that in mind, you know, and it can be frustrating as someone who tries to educate myself on local legislation and policy and history when I'm like trying to tell people, like, we can do this, and they're like, Jill, not too much. Like, why are you being so loud?
Meeting them where they're at.
It's all about meeting them where they're at and understanding that they have been disappointed in large part for years. They didn't have food access before May 14th.
Right.
You know what I mean? They didn't own property before May 14th. So now that it happened, and now we're all of a sudden trying to have these conversations, and still approaching 2 years later, we still haven't seen anything change. They saw the worst thing happen in the history of our city with no immediate systemic changes. So now we're going to go talk to them about the 33. It's like, put it into perspective. Like, in the grand scheme of things, when you have people who don't know how they're going to eat tonight, they're not really too concerned about if they should cap the 33 or fill it in completely.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Right.
So I think, again, when you go back to systemic change and you start to remove the barriers that people are facing on a day-to-day basis when it comes to, how am I going to feed myself? How am I going to pay my rent next week? How am I going to make sure that my kids are safe in school? Like, when you start to remove those barriers, then we can start having those conversations about capping the 33.
Yeah.
But right now, people don't have the mental, emotional capacity to care about that when they are still surviving these systems that have not changed, again, in my lifetime.
Speaking of cynicism, skepticism, there does seem to be a few things, more than a few things, in the works to help boost the economy on the east side. East Side Avenues projects, and $3.2 million for projects along Jefferson Avenue, to name a few. But with the skepticism that maybe people think the money earmarked for these projects over the next 5 years won't get into their hands, or be beneficial to residents in the community. Are you taking a wait and see approach on that, on these projects, and what fruit is bared?
I am. I'm taking a very careful wait and see approach, because I also have a lot of that same skepticism. You know, I grew up in the Kensington Bailey area for my entire life, and you drive to Kensington Bailey now, it looks worse than it did when I was a kid in a community that has seen no economic growth. So it's like, it's time for our city and the state and even the federal government to earn the trust of the people who have had to bear the brunt of their inaction or their incompetence for years. They have to earn it. You have to earn people's trust. So if I talk to somebody and I'm like, man, they're giving all this money to completely revitalize Bailey, and they're like, yeah, I see it when I believe it. I mean, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah.
It's like, that's valid. That's valid. I'll believe it when I see it too. We'll all just believe it when we see it. And it's not because, again, I don't have trust in individual people.
Yeah.
You know, it's not because I don't think that Rasheed Wyatt really wants part of his district to have a street that you can actually drive down, right?
Right.
It's because systemically we have seen no change. It's because there are victims and survivors of May 14th who have still not gotten any money. It's because a month after May 14th, while working at Open Buffalo, I remember someone knocking on the door who worked at Tops and was there during the attack saying, I'm about to get evicted because I haven't been able to work. That is why I'm skeptical. That's why a lot of people are very skeptical. So that skepticism is very valid. And I do think that it is time for our local, state, and federal governments to start earning the trust of the people who are footing the bills for all of this.
Yeah, where has the money gone
Exactly.
for the victims? Nobody seems to know.
And it's always the process, right? We're going to put a commission of people in charge of this. And then we're going to have them have a meeting every month where they're going to talk about how they're going to. And I get that. Everything needs to be done with decency and in order.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want things to be done chaotically. But what's up? Like, what are y'all doing? Because, again, there is no reason that people who were in that store when that attack happened should have been facing eviction months after.
Right.
When they could not even bring themselves to come out of their homes because of the trauma. Like, what are we doing here? And that's what I mean. Like, we need to reimagine and determine what this city looks like if it actually works for us. Because that is not the city working for us. That is not the city protecting us or the state or the federal government. So it all goes back to the idea that we've been taught that we have to be resilient. We grow our resilience. We show that resilience. We live in resilience. Nothing ever gets better, but then we're told to just trust that things will get better. Like, it doesn't. Those puzzle pieces don't fit together.
What else have you been working on?
I'll be doing some work with AKG. So
yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, so myself, Julia Bottoms, and Tiffany Gaines are the three featured artists in a new exhibition at AKG called Before and After Again. And it was curated by Aaron Ott, who is the director of public art for AKG.
Yeah,
He's
shout out to
amazing.
Aaron. Yeah.
We all love Aaron. And yeah, for about 16 months after starting, obviously, after May 14th, we sat down with families and talked about their loved one. We didn't talk about May 14th, but we'd say, what was the hardest time you ever laughed? Like, what recipe was this family member responsible for at all the family functions? What smell reminds you of that person? Just because I feel like in a lot of instances like May 14th, we lose the humanity in it. The victims almost become martyrs. But they were people. That's somebody's aunt. That's somebody's grandmother. That's somebody's mother. So it was such... I don't even think I fully unpacked that experience yet. I don't think I would have been able to get through it had it not been for the fact that the three of us were doing it together. Because it was really heavy. But the exhibition is beautiful. And I hope that it offers space to sit and think, to reflect, maybe even to heal a little bit. It's open, it's free to the community. It closes September 30th, so they gave it a pretty long run. And then this month, we'll have a exhibition book that'll be published, and that'll be for sale at AKG. So yeah, along with that exhibition, there's some other programming that comes into play. So for example, I'll be doing some workshops and things like that at AKG as well over the next few months.
So one of my last questions is, how would you like Buffalo's East Side community, a resilient community already? How would you like the community to be defined 2 years from today?
2 years from today, I would like the community to be defined as a community who owns our own narrative. I would like our community to be defined as one that is not to be played with. You are not going to stand in front of us and feed us a dream. You will only give us a strategy. We will be heard. Like, I want us to be a community who speaks with authority because we know that what we're saying deserves to be heard. And most importantly, I want us to be a community that finds our beauty in our existence. I just want us to be people who understand that because we are here, because we are alive, because we can breathe in and out, that we are worth progression. We're worth sustainability. We're worth vision. We're worth all of the things that we need in order for our city to actually work for us. That stuff doesn't have to come because we experience trauma and because we've survived tragedy. It comes because we deserve it, because that is owed to us. I want us to be a community that takes back everything that is owed to us. I want us to be a community that doesn't fix the system, but we break systems, because these systems are fixed, right? They are functioning the way they were meant to. I want us to be a group of people that politicians and community leaders and, people look at and say, yeah, we can't play with them. We can't play with them because they're not taking no shorts.
You're listening to What's Next as we talk resiliency in Buffalo's Black community in the 2 years since the racist attack on May 14th. And we're here with Buffalo's inaugural Poet Laureate, the incomparable Jillian Hanesworth. Jillian, it's always a pleasure getting to talk to you and having you on our airwaves. You're listening to WBFO News, a part of Buffalo, Toronto Public Media.
You're listening to What's Next, our place to discuss the important issues of our communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario. We want to hear from you. Click on the Talk to Us option in the WBFO app, and we will work to get your questions or comments on the air. Do you have a story or concern that we should be addressing? Email us using whatsnext@wbfo.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
This is What's Next, and all this week we are reflecting on the 2 years since the racist shooting on Jefferson Avenue that claimed the lives of 10 people and wounded 3 more. Through the lenses of progress, challenges, resilience, reform, and Black joy, What's Next and WBFO is taking a deeper look at the 2 years since that fateful day. Joining me today is Western New York Peace Center Executive Director Deidra EmEl. Deidra, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Today we are focusing on resilience, and in the 2 years since 5/14, the city of Buffalo, and in particular Buffalo's community on the east side, the Black community throughout our time in this country, in every region of this country, is constantly asked to turn the other cheek, only to get smacked in it time and again. Is resiliency one of the gifts that Black people give to this country?
Well, I don't believe that resiliency is a gift. It's just what makes a people stronger, what continues to, help businesses thrive or families continue on. It's just what you become. I don't think it's necessarily a gift to this system. I think it's in spite of the system, capitalist system, that we are resilient.
How would you define resilience? And how have you how have you found resilience over the last 2 years?
So how I would define resilience is for something to grow, to be manifested, and to become its potential in spite of its circumstances, I believe is resilience. Sometimes we need those harder circumstances to become the flower or the potential human being that we are. Where have I seen resilience? I see it in the activities and the hearts of Black motherhood, especially on the east side of Buffalo in these recent years. I've had the opportunity to talk with Women of Peace Incorporated, for example, and they are mothers that that their children were victims of gun violence in the city of Buffalo. I've witnessed their healing circles and their connection with one another and providing community for one another. I see it in young Black motherhood through our Mommy's Village, which is another organization that has utilized the Western New York Peace Center space for their blessing ways for new motherhood and to utilize it for their community connection. And through all of this, some, have lost babies. Some mothers are going through hardships, but they still come together. They still support one another. They still provide diapers and milk and so on for each other, and even, job support for one another. So just in these two, just for example, I continue to see resilience. And both of these groups are mainly on the east side of Buffalo.
In off air, we were really getting into resiliency, and you said, it's not just, like you said, it's not a gift that Black people give to this country or this world. We can see resilience in poor Black people, but we can see resilience in poor white people as well.
That's right. I think that once like I said, when I'm thinking about resilience, I'm thinking about a flower. I'm thinking about, just anyone, humanity being resilient in the face of greed. In the face of when I talk about capitalistic systems, it's not just America, but it's all around the world, in which you have a small percent that have the most of the resources of this world, and the common people are still continue to be resilient in spite of greed and the powerful.
Do you think resiliency helps to promote diversity, equity, inclusion? Those words seem to be dirty words these days, but what's your take on that?
Well, they've come around again.
Yeah.
Every 5 years, words are rotated. So they're just, again, they're kind of, back in style. I think that it doesn't necessarily foster those things to happen. I think when we go back to understanding one another, understanding that a lot of us are in the same places, or we come from the same, we have a lot more in common than we have than different. And even the differences, we can respect we can respect that. We can celebrate that if we choose, but we can understand it. Okay?
Yeah.
And so I don't think it promotes resilience at all. I think it can help us together to be resilient against more of the larger oppressor, type of situation, or the larger system.
Promoting empathy.
Yes. So that's what we have to, I guess, connect with is like you said, or like we said earlier, is understanding one another, empathizing with one another, sympathizing with one another, actually truly listening, being compassionate, having that dialogue and saying, oh, I went through this similar, situation, or, we're not so different, or maybe we can come together, some larger issues and fight the real issues.
For hundreds of years, the open expression of emotion is something that has been denied Black and brown folks. Does our ability to be outwardly stoic while inwardly going through pretty much every emotion short circuit our ability to be resilient?
Well, I'll tell you that we have not really kept it inside. We have chosen to express ourselves in safe spaces with those who we know. So public spaces such as the hair salons and the barbershops and the Black churches and grandmama's house, all these spaces are spaces in which we can express ourselves, in which we do express ourselves. We pick and choose, who we want, to do that with, especially, like I said, because they're safe spaces.
Yes.
But it's becoming more and more, I would say, available or clear that more of us are speaking what's said in those spaces outward into the society in the public arena.
Why do you think that is?
I think that in some respects, we're tired. We have had enough. You have the same group in every generation, whether it was Shirley Chisholm or Fannie Lou Hamer, back, in the 60s and 70s, or where you have Zanetta Everhart today. She said the same thing that we would talk about, in her living room, let's say. She said at Congress, like, this is our talk. We talk about, continuing oppression and so on. So I think that it's a new, once you brought in video and you can tape things live, and you can see things happening as it happens, and you can actually see racism happening. The world can see it happening. Like when they saw George Floyd happening, we knew it for years,
right,
that, things like that happen with the police state. But many white people didn't believe that happens until they saw it for themselves. So now we can agree on something together because you seen it, I seen it. Now we both have the same witness. Now I can speak up more about what else has been happening. Now you can believe me. So I think that's why it's happening more in a larger society.
Does it make sense then to gatekeep those safe spaces as much as possible?
Yes, I think so. In some respects, these are like sacred spaces. These are, like I said, safe spaces for people to express themselves. However, like I gave an example of maybe, a politician wants to, walk into a barbershop.
Yes. Yeah.
And say, hey, I want to get to know what y'all talking about. No one's going to say a word, right. And wonder why he's there. Especially if you don't look like that community. However, once that politician, just for example, starts to live in that community, starts to go to that store, starts to, to be a part of that community in some way.
Right.
It's visible. Then they begin to build trust. This is why these spaces are safe. It's because there is trust.
How does family, community, and the notion of it takes a village to raise the child play into the resiliency of children?
One of my favorite subjects, I think. I think the village can raise a child in two ways. One, you can show the child what not to do. What kind of village am I living in? Man, oh man, all of a sudden you become resilient because of the state of your village. But however, then you have those within that village, that same village, that sees that light, that purity, and that focus in that child and wants to fertilize it, wants to give them all the information that they can give them, all the education they can give them. They want to shelter them. And I feel like that's what happened to me, where, I grew up on the east side of Buffalo. I grew up, on Jefferson Avenue, on East Ferry and Wohlers. I grew up on Riley Street and Main Street. I grew up in, literally within these areas. And yeah, I saw some really bad things. My house was shot up, and I wasn't a part of being, part of that shooting. I lived, above a drug house and a prostitution house. But in spite of that, there are beautiful women and men in my community, like Valeria Cray, like Betty Jean Grant, like Beverly Gray, like Mrs. Triggs. We mentioned Denise Barr.
Yes.
Like beautiful women. In my mind, I imagine women and men that I've met that took me under their wings, that gave me a job in the hair salon, that encouraged me in school, that once I knew one teacher in school and they knew somebody else in the community that they would say, hey, I want you to meet one of my students. So you was taken and visited in other places and say, look, they're coming to your college. I want you to get to know them. I want you to look after them. Mm-hmm. So it's through these networks that you protect these potential flowers, these potential beings of light. Yes. And so, so I think that, the village literally raised me, and I'm thankful for that village. I'm thankful for it, but it took everybody having a piece and everybody seeing the potential of that child, which we, at the Western New York Peace Center, that is what we focus on, is our, what we call our peace ambassadors, our leadership program for our youth that we're, pulling together.
Talk a little bit more about that. Yeah.
Well, for over 15 years, we've been co-directing our summer camp, Camp Peace Prince, with the Sister Karen Center. For over 15 years, we've had our after-school program, curriculum, and basically we teach children from 5 to 18, just depending on the program, how to be peace ambassadors, how to character development, leadership development. This program, Peace Jam, for example, is on the board is the actual Nobel Peace Prize laureates. Mm-hmm. Okay. And they focus on inspiration, action, and education. So the students are inspired by the Peace Prize laureates. Okay. They're inspired by their life. They learn about the character. They learn about the character developments that they should have, mm-hmm. okay, or that those laureates have had, and to look at it within themselves. And then they work on a global call to action project. So that might be raising money to build a new well in Kenya, or like when the year of the massacre happened, we were doing Peace Jam, and the students created a large banner, since our Women's March was literally the day after. Mm-hmm. So our students were a part of that march, and our students created a large banner to, like, I forgot, it said something like, like no racism, like no hate, like love overcomes hate, or something like that. Right. But they all created that banner together to promote publicly. So what I'm working on is I'm trying to pull these programs together. So we've always done them separately, but now I'm trying to bridge them together, and also working with other organizations such as PUSH, Neighborhood Community Center, and so on, and Alternative to Violence training program to also incorporate within our training. So I'm really excited about them, or about this program. And I'm hoping, that all these pieces come together.
I've got a 2-year-old niece.
Violence.
Is there something that I can teach her
Yes.
between now and when she turns 5?
Yes. Compassion. When she, wants that toy and she bops the other child across the head for it, you say, now, you teach her how to put herself in the other child's shoes. Okay, how did you think they felt when you took that away? Mm-hmm. How do you think that hurt them when you hit them, or did it feel good? I think it hurt them, but they shouldn't have took my toy. We can use our words, and even today we can use our words. Words have power. Right? Mm-hmm. Even today, even though we're talking locally right now, we're thinking globally, and we are telling whole countries to use their words to negotiate, to talk, to find a common ground. So it starts very little, because in 2-year-olds, it's all about their world.
Yes.
And you have to teach them to think of others, to come out of their world, and into someone else's.
So I've heard this from others in Buffalo's East Side community and elsewhere, that they're afraid that as each year goes by, the memory and the lessons and the issues that were further illuminated by 514, by that racist shooting, will creep back into the shadows. Some say it's already happening. How do we avoid what has essentially happened in Charleston, South Carolina, where it's been 9 years since the Mother Emanuel shooting, and it seems to have been pretty much forgotten, except for the community that was affected?
Excuse me. Well, I think that, how do I start? How do I start this? One, we have to start to be revolutionaries and not reactionaries. So when we're working on a revolution, we're working on a revolution of ideas, a revolution of thought, and how we want to continue forward, right? When we're reactionary, we just like, I'm mad, I'm protesting, I'm rally, but then that dies down. It's going to die down because we can't stay that way.
Right.
Okay, now we can walk around just, being angry, but now we're going to take it out on one another again. Okay, so I believe a constant dialogue on purpose with other communities, making forums and other, not low key, but, not so public type of events where we can communicate and have a dialogue with one another and find that common ground and find out what the real issue is.
Yeah, informal discussions. And this racism is still what's the word? It's still, I would say, a symptom, of capitalism. It's a symptom of the society that we live in. And then it's utilized. It's just like having bumps on your skin or a rash. And then it's used to continue to oppress, But it's not the root of the issue. So I think, understanding what the root is and educating ourselves about that is going to be quite important in order for our minds to change. They can pour all kinds of money right into our communities, which they have. As far as, the government, HOCO, what have you. And if our minds are not changed in how we take care of what we have, of how we look at community, it will continue to become it will become an eyesore. It will become, it will be degraded, and we will have no ownership whatsoever. And that actually brings me to my next question. What has also been said to me from Eastside residents is that the promises made to the Eastside right after 5/14 have not been met. I mean, do you agree with that, or what are you seeing? And I point back to the Tops on Jefferson, obviously the scene of the shooting, but also like that Tops is like the symbol for food apartheid on Buffalo's East Side.
Yes, so I believe in, and with our voice, we have a vote, right? We have a vote, we have a voice for our opinions and so on to be made known. And I believe that the government has its part in how it supports our communities.
Yes.
At the same time, we have a part too. More than just a vote, we can decide what we want in our community, and we can pool our monies together, because there is money circulating within the Black communities. Every Black community in Buffalo isn't poor, okay? And even the poor still pool their money together to do what they want. So when we was talking earlier, I talked about the slave mentality, okay? Like, a lot of us still have that slave mentality where we wait for our slave master or the oppressor to provide our food, shelter, and clothing. No, we can provide that for ourselves if we, again, re-educate ourselves. And it's not that we haven't done it before. There were other grocery stores on Jefferson Avenue. There were other businesses on the east side of Buffalo, Black businesses, okay? For many different reasons, they are gone now. Part of that is governmental, is redlining, right? Part of that is, government support. But another part of that is the community support, period. So what are we going to do about the change in our community? Because whether you plant a garden, or whether you build another building for another grocery store, who will own it? How will they own it? Will the people have ownership of it? And do they know how to deal with ownership? there's a renter's mind and then there's a house owner's mind.
Right.
So we have to start to change or really transform our minds, right?
Yeah, you point to 50 Women with a Vision as a group that has done that, has taken up that mantle.
Yes. So over 25 years ago now, 50 Women with a Vision started the revamping of Jefferson Avenue. That's where you have your Apollo Media Center. That's, where you have the new and improved Meriwether Library, and so on. Beverly Gray, the Business Center, Valeria Cray of the Creative Effects Hair Salon. Now what you'll see now is Zawadi's books in front, but her salon is still in the back. She's still a business owner on the street. Zawadi Books now is on that street. Now they're working cooperatively in that, in that one space. So 50 Women with a Vision, Valeria Cray was one of the co-founders, and I believe Beverly Gray and many other business owners, Black women business owners, or heads in the community, leaders in the community came together to talk about how are they going to revamp and bring Jefferson back to its former glory.
And so this could be, you could do this on any commercial strip on Buffalo East Side.
Yes. I think, that's where, the Jefferson Arts Festival, it's their creation. And like I said, other things that you see now, how Jefferson came back to where it was in the 90s, it's better than where it was. It's because of their hard work for the last 25 years. So yeah, it needs to be done. People are focused on the Jefferson, but many residents say, there's other parts of the East Side that's affected by, Tops too.
Exactly.
As many other families that, they shop there, but they don't live on Jefferson or off of Jefferson. They live in other parts of the East Side community. So yeah, we got to think outside the box.
Last year, you had an event, Embracing Buffalo, Healing Moments. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then talk a little bit about if you got anything going on, around 514 this year?
So because we know that many other places and people are doing, so many other things in remembrance of the day, we really try not to, do anything else that's special or what have you. What we do is just try to provide a informal space for people to connect more intimately. So last year, we had a drum circle basically, and a space where we have facilitators from the Center for Mind Body Medicine, Dr. Sabrina Njai, Dr. Carol Penn, both Black women, Miss Dina Adler, art therapists. These are all facilitators of the Center for Mind Body Medicine that came and has continued to come since the beginning of everything happening. Came and basically provided a healing circle for community residents, East Side, West Side. We had it on the lawn of the Network for Religious Communities on Delaware. And it was just a beautiful space. Like I said, it was live, drumming, was, some dance, you moved as you was singing, it was just like the Black church. You just, did as you was moved to do, but it was, an organized and beautiful space. So this year, we're hoping to do similarly. I believe the Black Caucus, what have you, may be on the same day. So, we might have a gathering at the end of the day, and we're just, we just have some food and just be connected.
Now, do you dance?
Yes, I do.
You find power in it, though.
Yes. I find a lot of power and healing in dance. So yeah, I think that's a part of my makeup. So from African dance, to I went to performing arts for dance. And that takes me back to the African American Cultural Center. Again, another space for healing for our youth and to connect with culture and to connect with each other. We can't lose our community spaces like that.
Right. Got to gatekeep those.
Those are one of those spaces.
Yes. So how can the East Side community and Buffalo's Black residents, throughout the city, remain resilient in the years to come?
Don't let oppression get you down. Because you can't make resilience. You can't create resilience. You just become resilient. So it's having hope in the face of in the face of downpression, you have hope. You know, in the face of depression, there's hope. And I always like to say, like, where there's life, there's hope. Like, today might have not been a good day, but there's tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you think, you know, if you believe in God, you thank God, you be thankful, you know, to the universe for waking you up this morning. Now you have a new opportunity and a new day to be your best self.
And we talked off air just about kind of thinking outside of your bubble or your box,
Yes.
and kind of making connections between local and maybe things that are going on in the rest of the world.
Yeah. So, you know, for us to kind of continue forward, we have to, like I said, think outside our box or our bubble or, you know, a circle, and understand to think globally and not just locally. Believe me, I understand how, you know, local is important. You know, that's directly affect. We see how it directly affects us. When tops went down, it's like, okay, what's the next grocery store? You know, like that was a local disconnect, right? Or connection, and, you know, where we were disconnected. We didn't have food directly. But when there's no food on the grocery shelf, or when the food is 3 times the amount it used to be, why is that? And when we look at, you know, put on my, you know, with my Peace Center hat on, you know, we look at these wars, these conflicts happening around the world, and we don't understand the global economy and how that affects what's on our dinner plates. You know, so and Black folks used to be connected to the peace movement, to the nuclear disarmament, and so on. We were connected because our people, our Black men, were sent, along with other poor white men, were sent over to Vietnam and other wars to fight, you know, for this government. But we have to stay connected, because even though they're not, you know, being shipped off on because the government is making them do it, sometimes they're going into it because we don't have enough to live off of, right? I'm going into the Army so I can get an education. I'm going into such and such. But, you know, why is that? So we got to look at the root of the problem, you know, and we got to think more globally and not just locally.
This is What's Next, where we've been discussing resiliency with Western New York Peace Center Executive Director Deidra, EmEl. Deidra, I want to thank you again for being on with us today. It's a lively discussion. You're listening to WBFO News, a part of Buffalo Toronto Public Media.